Today marks something significant. 5 years since the January 6th attack, later ruled by the courts in a convicted sedition, which was the biggest thing going on 5 years ago tonight. I bet you remember where you were that night, the days after. It uprooted a long tradition of the peaceful transfer of power in the United States because Donald Trump had lost the election, President-elect Biden was coming into office, and the violence perpetrated by the people later convicted who were summoned there by Donald Trump meant we didn't have an actual peaceful transfer. It took what had been rhetoric and later punished in court as defamatory lies and Trump's big lie and turned it into crime and action. All because so many people took action, including criminal violence against police, under the claim or the belief that Trump didn't actually lose the election he lost. 5 years later, much has happened. And we are also approaching the one-year mark of Donald Trump's second term. And that one-year mark is also the anniversary of the sweeping pardons he issued, not for some on those days, not for, say, a few people where you could have looked at their individual case, or even people who didn't actually carry out violence, although that would be itself controversial given that they stormed the Capitol, committing crimes against the Congress, the United States itself. But he issued the sweeping pardons for everyone, the violent actors, the people convicted of sedition, people who had long, long prison terms left to serve. He freed them. And so the split-screen moment of our time at the Capitol tonight is Trump supporters actually returning to the scene of the crime. We've all heard about how you shouldn't return to the scene of the crime. That's why that's a cliched term. But they're doing it because, unlike any other president in modern history, they are backed in their past convicted crimes by the sitting president. We don't need to raise our voices or have a lot of emotion or rhetoric to just underscore how wrong that is. The person who is supposed to carry out the faithful execution of the law, supporting breaking the law by people who would have ended our democracy if their crime spree worked. So those pardoned rioters back in town, House Democrats holding the other side of the ledger, a hearing about the rule of law, and of course still dealing with the fact that the sitting president has the most anti-police agenda in modern history, having pardoned and freed all those people who were otherwise going to be punished for their violent crimes against police. It is a fact that Donald Trump is the most soft-on-crime, anti-police president in his second term of any in the modern era. The hearing spoke with the actual Capitol Police who risked their lives that day. There were other members of Congress involved, and there was even someone who reflected on their crime.
Donald Trump and far-right extremists in Congress have repeatedly attempted to rewrite history and whitewash the horrific events of January 6th.
We gather to continue to uphold our oath to support and defend the Constitution.
Pardoning criminals who severely beat me and my fellow officers that day is completely unacceptable.
I am truly sorry from the bottom of my heart for being part of the mob that put you and so many officers in danger.
That's today, living history, as they say. As for the march by the once convicted, now pardoned convicts, that included one of the leaders who had shown through basically their actions and now their further lack of remorse, as well as the evidence laid out by the DOJ after Jan 6th, Enrico Tarrio has showed that this wasn't some spontaneous riot as we were first told, as the cover stories went, because people planned it and organized it and planned formations and met in secret and always had plans to go in and try to do by force and violence what they could not achieve at the ballot box because Trump had lost. The Proud Boys veteran spoke today.
Would you do anything differently if you could?
The problem is I wouldn't do anything differently because I didn't do anything wrong, you know? Am I guilty of celebrating what happened on the day of January 6th? Of course.
The president has said in the past, the Proud Boys stand back and stand by. Are you guys standing by the president?
We've always stood by the president. I've said that since day one.
And on it went. Now, it is easy with time in general to forget how things felt and occurred at the time, the actual facts. And in our current era, with a president who's been caught lying by fact checkers more than any other modern politician, and a lot of corporate pressure to spin or minimize or distort what you hear, a censorship campaign in the second term, as well as the whole weird fake news tech AI world we're in, where people see stuff and they say, is this real? Is that real? I just want to remind you tonight, and this is a fitting time to deal in facts, that we know what happened that day, and we know how the members of both parties viewed what happened. And the Democrats have been consistent about that, and people can debate the politics of all this if they want. But even the Republicans, who were, of course, talking in essence to their own Republican leader in Trump, who'd lost, and some of the fans who clearly were upset, the Republicans at the time were then unanimous about how wrong Trump and the insurrection actions were.
This failed insurrection only underscores how crucial the task before us is for our republic.
We had police officers, the men and women that we walk by every single day that guard the doors and we say hello to, out there with riot gear getting spit on and attacked.
All I can say is count me out. Enough is enough.
You just heard from senior Republicans, not just some random grouping. You have the Senate leader at the time. You have Marco Rubio, who was very clear that he said he was against that attack on police that Trump had fomented. Now, of course, you know he's helping Trump with anything he wants as a key top cabinet member. And Lindsey Graham, who was just on the plane with Trump defending the Venezuela actions and other things. They said count them out. Now, of course, we know what's happened since then. But it's actually deeper than that. And this is important in a time where people, your government, is sometimes lying to you. And other entities, including powerful corporations, are sometimes kind of doing what they can to just stay out of Trump's way and try to get through the next 3 years. Reality, though, matters. Don't let them trick you about that. And so if we need evidence of just how obviously wrong this was at the time, after it occurred, and I just showed you what the top Republicans had said, and the courts were looking at this, and the next administration was expected to have a normal, lawful DOJ, which of course would investigate and potentially prosecute, as they did, these crimes at the Congress. Even Donald Trump felt the need to publicly say something that you almost can't imagine him admitting to now today, that he viewed that attack, he claimed, as heinous, outrageous, lawless, violent mayhem that he opposed. Take a look.
I would like to begin by addressing the heinous attack on the United States Capitol. Like all Americans, I am outraged by the violence, lawlessness, and mayhem. To those who engaged in the acts of violence and destruction, you do not represent our country. And to those who broke the law, you will pay.
He was lying. He was trying to protect himself. He had seen his insurrection fail, and he knew that within 2 weeks he would really be out of office. And he knew, as someone who's tangled in the law before, that he could be in trouble himself. And later he was, of course, indicted for a whole series of crimes, legally presumed innocent. He was not convicted, as you know. But think about that. Donald Trump, to save himself, was claiming that it was bad and wrong and they would be punished. And yet, in a hypocritical development that we've all lived through and now has become normalized for some, not only did he back off saying they should be punished, he freed them all. Trump was impeached by the House a second time. And it's easy to look back with hindsight and say, oh, well, we know what happened. But he may have had some level of worry that if he were actually convicted in the Senate, he could never run for office again. And then, remember, those trials wouldn't have been delayed forever, and who knows what would have happened. So even if you think that was a small risk, it wasn't zero, and he was out to save himself. There were over 1,000 total convictions pursuant to that day. Special Counsel Smith indicted Trump, recently testified about it, and concluded, at least from the DOJ's view, that Trump had that multi-part plan to overturn the election and that the violence was a part of it that he benefited from. Jamie Raskin, a key member of that committee, writes in the Times now that we're still caught up in a struggle between forces who are willing to use authoritarian violence and those who stand up nonviolently for our Constitution. Neither side can claim victory yet, he reminds America, because it's still very much Jan 6th in America. That is the standoff tonight. It is a big deal no matter what, but it also comes after a weekend where Donald Trump showed his complete lack of support, interest, or even claim for democracy abroad, which is no surprise when you remember that 5 years ago, he was the leader trying to stop democracy right here at home. We have a special guest on this important story right now. Democratic Congressman Madeleine Dean served as the January 6th impeachment manager. That was for the second impeachment after the January 6th attack. Thank you for being here. I wonder if first you might share any of your reflections just on hearing and seeing that video again of both the Republicans, your colleagues, but also the president claiming at the time, Donald Trump, that these were heinous acts of violence and people should pay.
Well, I thank you, Ari, for being sure to cover and remember this day. We have to continue to remember this day and call it out for the atrocious insurrection incited by a sitting president that it was. An attack on this citadel, this seat of power that is such an important representation of American strength and democracy and justice. I was here 5 years ago. I was up in the gallery with many other members and actually members of the press as well when all hell broke loose. I was also in the hearing today and very glad to hear the testimony of many folks. I won't spend 1 minute on those who came to commemorate their violent acts who have been pardoned by the President of the United States. I won't spend a minute on them. What I will spend a minute on are the heroes. The police officers, Capitol police officers, municipal police, ultimately the National Guard and others who came to save us, to protect us from a mob that the president invited